Cool. So, Brock, you've been working on the book for a while now. Do you remember what the conversation with Nathan was that kind of led you guys to this game?
When we got started with this, I'd pitched a completely different game idea to you, and you'd been
Right.
talking with Nathan separately, and Nathan was like, I don't know anything about video games, but I want to write about the UV Bowl film of Postal, because it's a chance to write about all UV Bowl, but specifically the most UV Bowl film that exists, I think. And then you put the two of us together because we've always been friends and always been looking for a project. And it was like Nathan's not a guy that plays video games, and I'd never played any of the Postal games before, so it's such an interesting thing because I'm one of the only people in this series who isn't writing about their very favorite game of all time. I'm writing about a game I'm playing for the first time 20 years after it came out, and for something based on like shock value, it's a weird thing to have to dive back into the history of what made this shocking before and what does it mean to play it now, especially in the current political climate and a lot of the things that go along with that.
I mean, my perception is that like it was almost more of this cultural event than it was a game that people actually played. I mean, we were both kids when it came out.
Exactly.
But I don't remember people talking about it except in the abstract. Is that
When I told my mom I was writing a book about it, she goes, "I remember that," and I don't remember the game. So it is a thing that has been on the news, and it's still on the news, and the people that made it are still, whenever there's a shooting, CNN gives them a ring to see if they want to come talk. It's 20 years later, and that's it's a shocking thing that has become almost more of their careers than the video game making aspect of it is to be political commentators. And when you look back at the original political commentary, putting it within a context is so tricky. And even to look at things that we've had to look at, like how many actual postal shootings were there around the time that this game was made? Like, was it playing on sort of like a Chuck Klosterman talks about evil and the idea of women being tied to train tracks, and like outside of a couple of movies, did that ever actually happen in the real world? And ours is like how many postal shootings had happened by the time Postal is trying to do that. But there's not even a postal worker in the game, so it's this idea of a cultural point where
he's not even a
postal worker. He's just a guy going postal.
So it's like removed from the thing that it actually is. That's really interesting. I mean, do you think that in our culture at the time, that was like considered going postal was somebody going crazy because they couldn't take it anymore, and we sympathize with them, or was it more like badass, like falling down, Michael Douglas?
It is very falling down. It definitely has little pieces of the Matrix and stuff in it, and he's got the Duster and the Terminator, and there is an idea that he's a hero here, and it's actually the original game is so dark in its depiction of that he's actually just it's a lunatic who thinks that the earth is swallowing us up through sin. But the later games get into this idea that the same character is a guy who is just always stuck in the monotonous parts of daily life, and they explode into violence. It's him waiting to pay for milk at a store. It's him trying to pick up his paycheck, and protesters show up, or somebody sets fire to the library, or things like this.
Yeah, because in Postal 2, so it's sort of like the world is going postal around him.
Yeah, he's the sane one who just has to keep waiting in line places, and he's defending himself against it, whereas in the first one, he's a man on a rampage, and the world is I guess trying to defend themselves, but maybe they're all the ones that are crazy, but he's definitely the one that's crazy.
It sounds so way more muddled.
As it goes on, I think they get clearer about what they're doing, and the movie really ties into that because it's a man who is just beset by every part of modern life, including the games love to have him have a terrible wife who is behind most everything. She's the primary antagonist, making him go run errands and do stuff, and you're like, sure, of course, that's it's a weird, tricky thing because it's also trying to do satire, and sometimes you can do satire well, and sometimes you don't.
Uwe Boll is not known for his subtlety.
There's nothing subtle about what he does in this movie either, but there are some things that he does that are very successful, shockingly, and especially revisiting it now. And as far as an adaptation of a game goes, it's actually, I think, very successful, but you've got to look at what that original material is. And to understand what UV Bull takes away from that, and UV Bull is something that Nathan identified very early, is that like 90% of UV Bull's movies are about a guy going crazy and going on a shooting spree.
Huh.
And this is the one that sort of like ties into something bigger in terms of ideas. And so in that way, there's more to say and more things happening that are worth exploring.
So weirdly, it might be his most successful video game adaptation in terms of like him doing what he's trying to do.
It's a mix of what he knows he's good at. It's what he's tried to put on to so many other like properties. And this one he just got started.
That resist it fundamentally because they're just cool video games that are pretty simple.
I was trying to be alone in some darkness. I don't know what was. So between looking at the games and talking to the people behind it and putting everything culturally in places, but also reevaluating it now in a much different place. And the game's hit a 20th anniversary this year. They re-released the game a couple of years ago. They did DLC for a game 16 years later and really tied in that stuff to the current gaming political climate, which raises a lot of questions, and I got to get answers to a lot of those questions, which were equally surprising. Yes.
It doesn't seem like a financially based decision to release a DLC 16 years later. Like, your audience is going to be selective.
A lot of it was actually based on the fact that they'd run a very successful Kickstarter campaign, and one of the big bads in the DLC is Tim Schafer, who is sitting in a vault with all of his Kickstarter money. So sure, that face is my face. There's a lot happening. It is video game industry unchecked. And that's behind a lot of the choices, and you get to watch it play out over 20 years in a couple of different games. The third game in the series, they gave to a Russian studio to make, and then a financial collapse hit Russia, so the game that wound up being released 5 years late is basically unplayable.
Right.
It doesn't run, but if you can get it to run, I'm sorry. They refunded everyone in America that bought a copy of it, which is a pretty cool move for something that you're like, I'm going to distance myself from this.
Right,
so
they could just disappear forever.
You can take that money and go, but when you're in the first level and you're shooting jizz rags at Sarah Palin, that is, and this is like 2014, you're like, oh, we missed this joke by 8 years, and also probably we should never have done this joke. Like, what is...
It seems like maybe the reason that like news crews are still going to them and stuff is maybe they're kind of desperately hanging on to that cultural cachet of...
They're completely unfiltered, that is both a weakness I think that they have, but also an incredible strength, because you know exactly what you're going to get with them. They're going to be honest with you, and they have something that they think is very funny, and they're going to stick by that. And they're the only people in video games right now making that sort of thing, for better or for worse, because there's no one to stop them.
Yeah. It seems to harken back to a simpler time of outrage culture,
right?
Where you could just make stuff that is dumbly violent and kind of apolitical, or maybe like anarchic instead of...
We were talking about this earlier, but I've interviewed Jack Thompson recently, and Jack Thompson, angry video game lawyer man, doesn't really exist anymore to do his thing, and there isn't a video game antagonist or checker in that same way. And it kind of feels like they need that person to exist to do what they're doing, so they've faded away too.
Yeah.
So there's
we don't exactly have our like Nancy Reagan right now. And weirdly, like, I mean, what you've said before too is so the internet kind of takes up that role.
Yes.
But weirdly, the internet is the scold on the other side of the coin, right? Saying like, you're not making it shocking enough. You're censoring your, so it's kind of...
And that's part of why they did DLC that aligned with that part of the internet, because as they were explaining to me, they spent decades doing these games, and they would hear from video game reviewers, I tried to give you a 5, but my editor said we could only give you a 1 because of what you'd made. And if you're the sort of person that's your life's work, I get why you start to say there need to be ethics in video game journalism, if that's just all you've ever seen is that thing, and then you don't understand the other repercussions of anything else.
Yeah, imagine if you were in the video game industry for many years and yet your only window into it was Postal.
Yes. So it's an incredibly fascinating thing, and Nathan's, of course, just got the sharpest mind in the game for this sort of thing, and especially taking on schlock and finding the gold inside of it. So
totally.
It's
I mean, this is Nathan's project. So
yes.
so for you guys who might not know, one of his biggest projects he's ever done is called my Euroflops and then my World of Flops, which is just looking at big cultural flops and looking at, like, are they secret successes, are they fiascos, or are they failures, and kind of trying to parse out, whether they have any value for us at all. So this is his wheelhouse, right?
And the Postal film also features a member of the Kids in the Hall who had just been divorced by his wife in Canada, and she took all of his money.
Dave Foley.
Yeah. So there's this incredible sadness over it that this man has to be shown, like, taking a dump on a toilet for, like, a long period of time and things like that, because he's just been bankrupt, and that's what gets him into this film. So you're watching the saddest clown that you've ever seen.
It's like, this is how far I've fallen.
I'm on the bowl in a UV bowl. It's you can't go lower.
Well, he eventually he made good stand-up out of it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that was nice.
So it's and the film opens with a recreation of 9/11. Great, exactly.
Yep.
That's
yep.
and it is weird how successful of a satire that winds up being when you revisit it years later. I was kind of surprised too. It is the best you can say of it is that this is perhaps the smartest thing UV Bowl's ever done on a lot of levels, and to see it work against this video game thing is to see them play off of each other. I think Postal 3 takes a lot of nods from that, and they put UV Bowl into the game. At one point, you have to defend him from angry nerds that are trying to murder him, because, of course, nerds are always trying to murder film directors, as you know. So
that's been my experience.
Yes.
I think I need to watch the movie at some point, and as an editor, I need to do my research. And but yeah, no, I've been really excited by the pages that you've already sent me. I'm really excited to see what Nathan sends us.
That's our couple name.
You guys are adorable.
Yeah, we've made a weird boss fight book that's about a movie and a bunch of games.
Have you noticed, like, we do a weird one every season? Yeah, like we have to.
Well, you have a couple of weird ones this year, so we're just we're amongst the weird.
Cool. Well, thanks for talking to me some more, Brock. And
absolutely.
Thank you guys for listening. Please continue to support the Kickstarter and check out the new things that we'll be rolling out through the rest of the campaign.